So these notes are going to cover a lot of the pre-war World War II things that you need to know, as well as why and how the war will actually begin across not only Europe, but into the Pacific. So the most important vocabulary word to focus on is going to be this one right here, which is appeasement. And this is really how World War II begins, especially in Europe. And it's where you give in to demands that someone has, hoping that they won't ask for anything else and that they will not start a war. Pacifism it doesn't just mean opposition to war. It usually means opposition to violence. The Axis powers we will go over, but just know that they're going to be Germany, Italy, and Japan. A few other countries will join, but the big three are Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the Sudetenland is just an area of Czechoslovakia that's going to be important. So the first really expansion that the Axis powers do is before they're even the Axis powers and they're just acting independently, is going to be kicked off by the Japanese. So the Japanese take this area circled in red, which is Manchuria, all the way back in 1931. In the League of Nations, that if you remember back to World War I, that association of all the nations in the world opposed Japan, but they don't have any power, so Japan simply just leaves the League. Japan waits about 6 years, and then they launch an invasion into eastern China here, and by landing troops on the coast here. This war is going to last the entire time of World War II, all the way into 1945, and it's the first one that really kicks off the wars of expansion that will happen during this period. This cartoon explains the League of Nations from back then. So think back to World War I, remember about the League of Nations, how it's all the nations of the world are supposed to belong to this alliance, and if a conflict breaks out, the League will take care of it. But one key nation did not join the League, and that was the United States. So the U.S. is standing over here, and the League of Nations is telling them, do something about China and Japan fighting, but the U.S. has no interest in doing that, so the League has no real power to stop these two from fighting their war that they're having. So the next nation to begin their expansion is going to be Italy. And Italy had slowly been building up its military throughout the 1930s, and in 1935 they decide to invade Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is located in eastern Africa. It's a fairly easy target for Italy, so the League of Nations again tells Italy, get out. They vote to sanction Italy. They try and hurt their economy, but Italy just ignores the sanctions because they can't enforce them, and Italy eventually conquers Ethiopia in 1936. You can just see the differences here between the Ethiopian army and the Italian army. The Italian army is very modernized. It has trucks, it has tanks, planes, poison gas, while the Ethiopian army at this time is very behind. Italy's next expansion is into Albania. Albania is right across the sea from Italy. It's, again, a very easy target. So Italy overruns the nation, takes it over. The League of Nations condemns the invasion again, but cannot enforce any of the rules they're putting on Italy, and the Italians get to keep Albania. Which this brings us to Germany. So Germany is actually the last one to begin their expansion, but they're going to be the biggest focus here. So Germany immediately began to defy the Treaty of Versailles in the 30s. Hitler rose to power saying the Treaty of Versailles was unfair, it needed to be gotten rid of. So what he does is he first rebuilds the German military. And if you remember back to the Treaty of Versailles, the German military was severely limited. Hitler ignores it, rebuilds it, the Allies allow him to do this. His next thing he does is in 1936, he does what's called remilitarization of the Rhineland. The Rhineland is this area that's labeled right here, and you can see it is very close to the French border. So what happened is, in the Treaty of Versailles, all German troops had to be taken out of the Rhineland. That way the French could see an invasion coming if the Germans decided to attack them again. Hitler redeploys German military troops into the Rhineland. This is his first huge violation of the Treaty of Versailles, and again, the Allied powers do nothing to stop him. This leads the Allies to adopt a strategy called appeasement. And appeasement is where you give in to an aggressor's demands so that they don't ask for anything more, and it usually doesn't work. The reason for this is they just wouldn't stand up to Hitler. They didn't have the willpower. Their people didn't want to fight another war, so they don't want to stand up to Hitler. The Treaty of Versailles, a lot of Western powers say it was too harsh on Germany. Hitler was just taking back regions of Germany that were taken from them. Isn't it right Germany should have an army? So a lot of people want to reverse those issues with the Treaty of Versailles. Some also saw Hitler as a defense against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was actually viewed for a long time as the biggest threat to democracy in the Western world, and Hitler hated communism. So Britain, France, a little bit in the United States, people said that Hitler is the only one who could deal with the Soviet Union, so let him stay in power. And also, at this point, many Western nations were pacifist. They didn't want to fight another war. The people had had enough in World War I. They wanted peace for the next 100 years, and just nobody would open their eyes and see what Hitler was, and he wasn't ever going to stop asking for demands until he got everything that he wanted, and eventually, obviously, that would have been the world. You can see in this cartoon here, it's Hitler stepping on the leaders of democracy. And each one, so like this demand here is rearmament. And then each one gets each demand gets bigger and bigger and bigger until they don't even know what Hitler was going to ask for. Now, during this time, the United States is what's called isolationist. We just want to deal with what's going on in America. We isolate ourselves and not deal with Europe's problems. So the United States signed something called the Neutrality Acts. And what this means is we are going to stay 100% neutral. And we're not involving ourselves with any war. So the first thing is the United States can't sell weapons to any nation at war. That makes it so that we cannot get involved. We're not allowed to even give a loan to a nation at war. That, again, keeps us from getting involved, showing that we're supporting any one side. And then finally, Americans couldn't even travel on ships of nations at war. So if Japan was at war with China, U.S. citizens couldn't travel on a ship that was Japanese. This is to avoid that situation with the Lusitania where Americans were traveling on a British ship while the British were at war with the Germans. The Germans sunk the ship, and it made Americans mad. The whole goal is, just like this campaign poster says, keep the United States out of the war. We don't want to deal with Europe's problems. We don't want to deal with Asia's problems. We don't want another war. So finally, the three Axis powers actually come together. Italy, Germany, and Japan. They sign a treaty and they formally become the Axis powers. In that agreement, there's two big agreements that they make. One, they all agree to fight communism. They all don't like the Soviet Union. And two, they're all not going to interfere with each other's expansion. So Italy's not going to mess with Germany's expansion into the Soviet Union. Germany is not going to mess with Japan's expansion into China and India. And Germany won't mess with Italy's expansion down here around Africa into Turkey, Iraq, and those places. That brings us to the Spanish Civil War now. So the Spanish Civil War is kind of a side note, but it's very important because it shows what World War II is going to be like, and it lets the nations kind of test all their weapons for World War II. So Spain had been split between the Spanish Republic and the communists and the conservatives in the military. They didn't like each other. So this guy, Franco, leads a revolt in 1936, and he is a conservative in the military. So his side is going to be called the Nationalist. So Franco and the conservatives are the Nationalists. The Republicans are the people who support the Spanish government and the communists. So we can already see who is going to support which side. So the war becomes international because different sides begin pouring money, weapons, and troops into the two sides of the Spanish Civil War. Hitler and Mussolini support Franco, mostly because he hates communism. Soviet Union supports the Republicans because it has a large number of communists. It ends in a nationalist victory with Franco becoming the dictator in 1939. But the big thing is all the nations use the Spanish Civil War to test their weapons. So we can see here it's two Soviet officers with two guys from the Spanish army. They use it to test their weapons. They use it to perfect their tactics. And that's going to be really important to Germany when they eventually begin their invasions of Western Europe. So you can see a little bit of the Spanish Civil War here. They're supplied by, this is an American tank supplied to the Spanish army. These are German helmets and German weapons supplied to Franco and his troops. This guy here wearing a German helmet, okay? They use it as their testing ground. So we're going to go back to German aggression now. So we already know that the Rhineland was militarized, but Hitler is not done with his demands to restructure Europe. And we already know that the Allies are going to adopt appeasement and let Hitler begin taking the areas he wants. So Hitler's ultimate goal is he wants to unite all the German people. After World War I, Germany was split up and a lot of territory was lost. So there's Germans living in places like Czechoslovakia and Poland and Belgium even. And Hitler wants to take all those Germans and have them be ruled by him. His second goal is to gain Lebensraum, or living space. So if you look at this cartoon down here, it's from the Nazis and it shows the population densities of several different countries. So we have the French here, the British, and then we have the Germans. And what this cartoon shows is that Hitler believes that Germany is overcrowded. So his goal, there's not enough resources, there's too much overcrowding. So his goal is going to be invade into Eastern Europe, this area here, and take all these resources and land from these people and give it to the Germans so the Germans have enough living space. When we go over the Holocaust, we'll go more in depth about his plans for this area, but just as a general idea, he wants to gain Lebensraum by taking these areas and resettling it with Germans. So to start gaining this Lebensraum, Hitler first starts the Anschluss. And the Anschluss, again, was not allowed in the Treaty of Versailles, but it's the union of Germany and Austria. So Germany and Austria become one country. Austria just becomes a part of Germany. The German army is sent in to preserve order in Austria because they said it was having internal problems, but really it's just Germany taking it over. It violates the Treaty of Versailles, but again, the Western powers do nothing. They let Hitler have this area. They appease him. They tell Hitler, you can have Austria, but no more demands. The next thing Hitler asks for is what's called the Sudetenland. If you look over at the picture, you can see the Sudetenland kind of in that reddish pink color. And Hitler says, hey, there's Germans that live in this area. It's mostly Germans, but it's in Czechoslovakia. We should rule over the Germans. So at the Munich Conference, France and Britain meet with Hitler and they give him the Sudetenland, but they tell him again, no more demands. You can have the Sudetenland, but no more demands. So at the Munich Conference, the Munich Pact comes along. And what this agreement is the Western powers say, no war. Germany can get the Sudetenland. There are Germans who live there, so Germany can rule over it. But Hitler has to promise no more demands. He has to not ask for anything else in Europe. And then we get to World War II actually beginning. So the Munich Pact is made. Everybody thinks that Europe is safe from a war, but the war begins to kind of be set up. So the first thing that happens is the Germans and the Soviets sign the Non-Aggression Pact. You're going to see it called the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, but the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact is pretty much what I have seen it called all the time. So in 1938, the Soviet Union and Germany, who absolutely hate each other, sign this pact. And it is an agreement publicly. So publicly, the agreement is they won't go to war. They're going to share resources. They're going to help each other out. In secret, though, they agreed to divide Poland. They had both lost land to make Poland. So the agreement is the USSR will get this side of Poland and the Nazis will get this side. All this pact is doing is buying time for both countries to build up their militaries. They both know war is coming, but they both need to build up their militaries so that at the end of the day, they can fight each other and be ready for it. You can see through this cartoon, it's making fun of the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. It shows Stalin and Hitler getting married, but it's saying, I wonder how long the honeymoon will last. Everybody knows that this alliance is fake, and someday they're going to fight, so they're kind of making it like they're married, and someday they're going to get a divorce. So in 1939, honoring their pact, Germany invades Poland from the west. So Germany attacks Poland from this side, and the Soviet Union attacks Poland from this side. This is really what starts World War II, because the Germans invade Poland, Britain and France declare war on Germany on September 3rd, and the war begins. Poland does fall to the Germans and the Soviets, and they split it, and Poland will not really become an independent country until the end of World War II. So that takes us to the beginning of World War II. And the one big question I want to ask you is, when did World War II actually begin? We have a bunch of different dates here, and it's really disputed by historians when World War II began, but kind of think of it on your own, and then we'll go over this question in class.